and welcome to Hot Take, the show where I take a controversial stance and try to justify it. Today I wanted to talk about the old Dragon Ball movies and why I didn't like them, but then I had an idea. Now, you see, through childhood and even adulthood, whenever a Dragon Ball movie popped onto my screen, I either gave it a shot and didn't like it, or avoided it entirely. Which resulted in me not having seen many of the major Dragon Ball films. And so I decided to give you guys the opportunity to change my mind. About a week ago, I sent out a tweet asking you guys this question. What are your 3 favorite Dragon Ball films that came out before Battle of Gods? Having received a surprising number of comments, I compiled all of them and found the 4 most recommended Dragon Ball films from you guys. Coming in at number 4 with 10% of the total votes comes BoJack Unbound. At number 3 with 11.6% of the total comes Cooler's Revenge. Slotting in, falling just short of the top spot at number 2 is Wrath of the Dragon at 15.4%, and the number 1 most favored old Dragon Ball film with 25.4% of the total votes comes Fusion Reborn. And so, before I knew it, my journey began. In earnest, I waited patiently as my computer legally acquired exactly 93.7 gigabytes of Dragon Ball movies. Once this entirely legal act had been completed, I began my campaign with Cooler's Revenge. After siphoning through all of the votes in the comments section, one film I was surprised to see show up as often as it did was this film. I had never seen it before and so went in with enthusiasm, and to be perfectly honest, it was okay. I had problems with it, but the movie had some interesting choices and moments I did not see coming. The most interesting part of the film for me was actually its middle section. Because Cooler's men, who are basically the Ginyu Force, are all equipped with scouters, Krillin and Gohan needed to keep their power levels as low as possible in order to keep them away from Goku, who at this time is barely hanging on due to an injury sustained from Cooler. However, the interesting part is, in keeping their power levels this low, escaping from rock slides becomes dangerous, lifting boulders becomes very difficult, and flying, well, that's impossible. Without wings, that is. Thankfully, Gohan has a pet dragon that grants him the ability to fly to Koron's tower to retrieve some senzu beans that Goku desperately needs. I really enjoyed this bit specifically, and the Piccolo fight that follows is honestly the highlight of the entire movie for me in terms of action. But I suppose my biggest complaint comes with the character of Cooler himself and the liberties this short film takes with the character of Goku. Cooler is honestly all the most boring parts of Frieza with none of the creativity. And Goku? Oh boy. If you're one of those people that think Funimation are solely responsible for turning Goku into Superman, watch this film. Toei Animation bypass Superman entirely and go straight for Jesus. In this film, Goku is like Jesus. Now, with that said, I have no issue with having a positive environmental message. In fact, I like it. But to frame it like this, where Goku is suddenly concerned with the lives of all these animals, the landscape, and even bringing them back to life from the brink of death, as if he were Jesus, is a step at least too far for me. Especially when you consider the amount of destruction he's caused in the search of a good fight throughout the entire series. As for the action, aside from the Piccolo fight, I was honestly a little underwhelmed. This may be due to the fact that I just got done watching the Broly movie last week, but I think more than that, what this film lacked was originality. The majority of the action is a less visually impressive rehash of Goku's fight with Frieza with too many of the same elements to be considered unique. And I think that's the biggest issue I had with this movie. It felt like a longer than average TV episode that had nothing to do with the story and sort of messed with the characters a little to achieve its goals. Now, Cooler did have some extremely cool moments that were unique to him, like when he cut through the Kamehameha, but to be honest, they were few and far between. Cooler's motivations in this film seem extremely contrived too. He was determined to search the forest for Goku because he wanted to be the one to end him personally, straight up refusing to blow up the planet because he thought that would cheapen it. But what does he do at the end? Try to blow up the planet that Goku's on. It really doesn't make sense unless I assume Cooler is exactly the same as Frieza in terms of personality, which I wouldn't know because he basically has 2 scenes in this entire movie. With that said, there are tons of aspects to like about this film. As I said, I really enjoyed the middle section and I love some of the character moments. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and when it does do something different, it's great and the action is smooth and nostalgic. And even some of the callbacks were charming. All in all, better than I expected it to be, but I wouldn't be running back to see it anytime soon. And so, next up is...
Shut up, BoJack!
BoJack. This movie is bananas, but strangely enough doesn't give me a lot to talk about. It's just a tournament that sort of gets out of hand, really. I personally enjoy tournament arcs in anime, maybe more than the average person, but going into this movie, I was led to believe that this was going to be a Gohan film, yet the entire first half could be seen as a Krillin mini-movie, seeing as most of the events that take place are from his perspective. However, with this film being called BoJack Unbound, I was really surprised to find that BoJack doesn't show up until over halfway through this film, which is surprisingly when the film nosedives for me. King Kai monologues about BoJack, basically telling us his backstory. A backstory that seems way more interesting than this exposition dump. By the time BoJack and the gang are lined up and ready to fight, the occasion doesn't have any sort of emotion behind it. We know nothing about BoJack's personality, his past, apart from what King Kai has monologued at us. And all in all, it just feels like the most forced interaction. Why would they have come to Earth? Because Earth's beautiful. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's really cool seeing Gohan at this age fighting, but after what happened with Cell, why can't he just go Super Saiyan 2? Now, you see, this is an issue because the villains in this film are sort of void of personality because they haven't been given that development. And so the film rests on the character Gohan, a character that gets a ton of his best qualities based on the villains he fights. See the problem here? And so because the villains are nothing of interest really, everything feels either forced, padded, or boring to me. Gohan is easily the most likable character in Dragon Ball, yet I really didn't like Gohan in this movie. He does nothing in the film besides wait, watch, get saved, fly to where his friends are being beaten up, and repeats this until the end where he too gets beaten up until Goku, through the power of Deus Ex Machina, saves the day by slapping some sense into him. Why did you need to be told that? To be honest, while beautiful, this plays out extremely heavy-handedly, with zero emotional investment primarily due to the superficial stakes, the villains, and the convenience with which Gohan forgot what he was fighting for. In the end, this movie feels very confused. Despite it starting with a very simple format, by the time BoJack and the rest of the gang show up, I honestly have no idea what the movie was trying to make me feel, besides more of what the Cell Saga did better. The first half enjoys a light-hearted tournament structure centered around what feels like Krillin, and it's honestly the best part of the movie for me. With that said, I understand loads of people love this movie because of its gorgeous visuals and the fantastic action sequences, but for me, action for action's sake is never going to interest me at all and will actually ultimately bore me. There needs to be an emotional story behind something like this, especially when you're talking about a character as emotionally driven as Gohan. All in all, in this movie, especially in the second half, things happen for questionable and contrived reasons, and honestly the pacing is all over the place. There are some great visuals, but that's never going to be enough for me to enjoy a movie, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, this is exactly the sort of movie I was expecting all of these movies to be. Just empty action sequencing. Now onto the second most recommended film, Wrath of the Dragon. This was actually an interesting movie, and it's a completely new and unique story to this film. It begins as Videl and Gohan fight crime when they come across this old fella who foresees the end of the world if all 7 Dragon Balls are not gathered. Naturally, the balls are gathered in a quirky and character-rich way that feels extremely Dragon Ball. A wish is made to release this hero from a music box. The result is Tapion's release, and the theme that accompanies him is spectacular and incredibly catchy, instantly becoming one of my all-time favorite Dragon Ball tunes. No small feat, I absolutely adore it. As for Tapion himself, for having just been introduced, his character is actually very interesting. Ignoring his great visual design, I think he fits perfectly within the story that's being told here with the Z Warriors, specifically with Trunks. Touted as a great hero, Trunks wants to help Tapion, who has isolated himself for reasons that are still unknown to the viewers. The forces that cause both Trunks and Tapion to interact are organic and believable, making for a genuinely emotional relationship. We learn that Tapion holds within him a great burden, a monster that has shown up several times in the story thus far that is intrinsically attached to him. He alone must play this song to keep the monster at bay, meaning he cannot sleep, and his release from that box was to the detriment of the universe. Trunks, on the other hand, wants to help Tapion. As a child, the label hero is hard to ignore, and what's more, it makes sense that Trunks wishes to have an older brother figure like Goten has with Gohan. It's honestly sort of touching as Trunks breaks down Tapion's walls and proves himself capable to him. However, at the halfway point, there's tons of exposition dropped. Now, it is delivered in a fine way, but it's again an example of a story that would benefit greatly from having a longer format to tell its narrative. These films are only 50 minutes each. This could have easily been made into a series of episodes or even a 90-minute feature. These 50-minute time restraints on these films act as a stranglehold on the stories they are trying to tell. As we approach the end of the film, the monster is released from Tapion, destroying the city. We get some great action sequences with the main cast, including Vegeta, who has been inexplicably absent throughout the film. Despite these efforts, however, all of our heroes are down for the count, except one. Tapion takes center stage, playing his ocarina, successfully sealing away the monster within his body, before falling to the floor, screaming in agony. It is then we get the best scene of the film. After spending the entire story working on the relationship between Trunks and his hero from another time, Tapion in desperation tells Trunks, one of the only people he trusts, that the only way to stop this monster within him is for Trunks to kill him using this sword. Which, while being a uniquely dark moment in Dragon Ball that's definitely earned, also acts as a potential origin for the blade future Trunks uses, retroactively giving more weight to the actions he carried out with that blade earlier in the series. It's honestly a fantastic scene, but naturally Trunks couldn't bring himself to do it. It's just too much to drop on a young kid that soon. Now, what would have made logical sense in this moment would have been for Trunks to realize that he missed his only chance to save everyone, and through great struggle gets in position to stop the monster again, per Tapion's request, killing him to save the day. But instead, the movie literally tanks its entire narrative in the final moments. While the move Goku did in Super Saiyan 3 was cool, he had literally nothing to do with this movie. The movie was about Trunks and Tapion, and maybe Gohan to a much lesser extent. I loved what this movie was doing up until this last scene, and honestly, it ruins the goodwill I had at the last hurdle. It's such a disappointing ending. Fusion Reborn was by far the most highly voted in the comments. So much so that it actually trended in the US after I sent out that tweet asking you guys this question. So that's pretty cool. Needless to say, I had high expectations for this movie. And after seeing it, I gotta say, I actually really liked it. This story is very, very simple, and I think that's a great thing. With a runtime of only 50 minutes, it benefited greatly from not having to juggle too many characters, motivations, and plot lines. Instead of doing that, this film has two plot lines: the Earth plotline and the main Otherworld plotline. These two scenes are happening simultaneously, and they motivate each other. While Goku is fighting in an Otherworld tournament, one of the workers at the check-in station breaks something and as a result releases all of the souls contained within Otherworld, thus bridging the gap between the living and the dead. It's an interesting premise to say the least, and Otherworld happens to be my favorite Dragon Ball setting, so it's right up my alley. Because of this accident in Otherworld, Goku and Pikkon are forced to deal with this issue directly, while the fighters of Earth are forced to face off against some of Dragon Ball's greatest villains, though it's not without its bad moments. The fight that takes place in Otherworld is honestly refreshing and fun at the beginning, before turning dangerous and thrilling by the end. Vegeta shows up to make the save, and because of the established check-in station mistake, it makes perfect sense that he shows up here to make that save. Janemba as a villain is exactly what this movie needed, and is everything I wanted Majin Buu to be in the canon story. Armed with an incredible moveset and a ruthless personality, he is an overwhelming force of nature to deal with, and a memorable one. I've criticized these films in the past for being too similar to their canon saga counterparts, and while this film does the same thing in trying to mirror the Majin Buu saga, I think it succeeds because unlike the other arcs of Dragon Ball, the Majin Buu saga left a lot to be desired, and that's putting it mildly. Now, with that said, there are aspects of this movie I really didn't enjoy, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here. The second half of the Earth subplot was awful. You know, when Hitler shows up for some reason? The artwork in this section is much more stylized than the rest of the film, and honestly just doesn't flow with the rest of the story's visuals at all. I understand that this section is there to add levity to the film, but with the fusion between Vegeta and Goku handling a large portion of that levity, this section really didn't serve a purpose for me at all. Ignoring this, because the story made sense, was kept simple, and all introductions were consistent with its established logic, I was able to enjoy the visuals in action to a much greater degree than I had with any of the other films. It's beautiful, action-packed, and a genuinely fun ride beginning to end. Definitely the best old Dragon Ball movie I have ever seen. And those are my thoughts on these films. Do you agree, or do you think I missed something? Was your favorite Dragon Ball film from the 90s on here? Let me know down below. In the meantime, I'm gonna go sleep. That'll do it for this week. Thank you so much for watching.